Beneath an unbroken sky of pale Arctic blue, the cruise ship Aurora's bow sliced through the frigid sea toward a wall of sculpted ice. The morning sun, low on the horizon, gilded towering bergs in golden light, casting long reflections across the glass calm water. On deck, passengers wrapped in parkas and scarves leaned over the railings, cameras raised as if to capture a prize beyond imagination. Among them was Eleanor Bishop, a wildlife photographer whose lens had chased polar bears across drifting floes and carved her reputation in National Geographic spreads. She pressed close to the railing now, breath misting in the cold, hands steady as she framed a towering berg tapering into the ocean like the prow of some ancient leviathan. Moments later, a sharp grinding sound cut through the air, a scrape of steel on ice so abrupt it snapped Eleanor's head upward. The ship shuddered, its entire superstructure quivering in protest against a force far greater than routine navigation. Passengers lurched, clutching rails. A child's cry echoed from the promenade deck. From the bridge, the captain's urgent voice crackled over loudspeakers, telling everyone to hold fast. Below decks, the thrum of engines faltered, slowed, then ceased altogether, leaving an eerie hush that swallowed even the wind. Seconds later came the impact, a harsh, metallic roar as the hull sheared against an unseen finger of ice. The forward compartment flooded instantly, water gushing with the sound of a waterfall unleashed. Deck plates buckled, railings bent, and the ship settled unevenly. Listing to port, crew members dashed into action. Orders shouted, emergency lights flooding corridors in stark red. On deck, Eleanor and her fellow passengers were hustled toward muster stations, life vests stretching across chests. Through it all, the ship groaned and whispered, a living thing wounded by the cold. Indifferent sea. A call went out, abandoned ship. Lifeboats were lowered, cables creaking under the strain. Teams trained for hours every week now performed in real life, lines pulled tight. Davits swung outward, aluminum boats swinging into the void. Passengers, shaking, climbed in 2 by 2, their breath ragged against the icing steel. With a final tilt and careful release, each lifeboat lowered into the water, bobbing like oranges tossed into a frosty vat. Eleanor's boat touched down with a soft splash. A half-dozen fellow travelers, eyes wide and pale, clambered aboard as crew counted off names and secured oars. Then came the screams. From the water's edge, where the ship's list had thrown open an emergency exit, half a dozen terrified passengers had tumbled into the dark, needle-cold water. They clung to railings at first, panicked, before the bow sank deeper and cast them farther into the sea. In the bleary light of emergency lamps, their limbs thrashed, arms reaching upward in desperate arcs. Eleanor felt her heart stall. As one of the lifeboats drifted free, she leaned over its side, calling out to them, her voice thick and uncertain. It was then, in the frantic swirl of human urgency, that they saw the polar bear. At first, it seemed impossible, a massive white silhouette emerging from a nearby pack of broken floes. The bear lumbered onto a small, level berg, its fur dripping with seawater and flecked by glints of sun on ice. It paused, nostrils flaring as it inhaled the commotion, the cries of humans, the shouts of crew, the mournful creak of the Aurora's flailing hull. Then, with surprising deliberation, it turned and padded toward one of the lifeboats that hovered ghost-like between shipwreck and icefield. Time seemed to slow. In that miraculous instant, every fear and disbelief dropped away. Eleanor's camera, trained on the bear, captured each majestic movement, the gentle sway of its powerful shoulders, the keen intelligence shining in its dark eyes. The bear reached the boat's stern and, with one enormous paw, nudged the hull in the direction of a nearby ice floe large enough to support the weight of frightened passengers. Its paw print, a half-moon imprint in the paint, marked the first of many. It stepped back, then repeated the gentle nudge, guiding the boat inch by inch toward safety. Crew members in adjacent boats gasped, oars lowering in sudden awe. Eleanor lowered her camera, voice shaking as she yelled instructions to row toward the ice floe. The bear, as if affirming its role, rotated on its hind legs and gave a low, rumbling snort, a sound so deep it resonated through the cold air like an ancestral bass call. Then it turned its great head toward the flailing swimmers, paws dipping in the water as it edged closer to the survivors. With surprising coordination, it broke a narrow path through the slushy pack, allowing those in the water to shimmy onto its back and then wade ashore onto the ice bank. All around, the scene took on the cadence of a myth in motion, a heroic bear leading humans away from peril. A reversal of the hunter-prey roles that defined polar ecology. Eleanor's lens clicked rapidly, documenting each moment for posterity, the bear's wet muzzle as it lifted a trembling passenger. The outstretched arms of the saved as they scrambled onto semi-solid ice. The shouts of relief muffled by the wind. Behavioral ecologist Dr. Mateo Alvarez, later interviewed in the warmth of an on-site command tent, would explain how the bear's actions reflected both instinct and learned behavior. Polar bears, highly intelligent and inquisitive, often investigate disturbances in their environment, shipwrecks, for instance, can attract scavenging bears accustomed to feeding on seal carcasses thrown onto decks by waves. Yet this bear's guiding behavior, nudging and escorting the boat, was extraordinarily rare. It's likely the bear associated the boat with its own safety. Alvarez theorized, and generalized that pushing it toward a stable ice platform would benefit both parties. There's a kind of empathy in that action, a cognitive leap from self-preservation to aiding another mobile object, even a lifeboat. Meanwhile, cinematographer Olivia Chen captured the aftermath in sweeping aerial shots, the bear standing sentinel on the ice edge as every survivor, wrapped in thermal blankets, was ferried off on additional lifeboats. Below, the Aurora's battered hull listed dangerously, but the lifeboats, guided by that unlikely hero, drifted to a safe distance. The score swelled, a haunting orchestration of strings and low horns, evoking the solemn grandeur of the Arctic and the profound interconnectedness of its inhabitants. By the time the bear turned away, paddling off into the melting floes from which it came, every eye on the ice regarded it with reverence. Crew members, their hands still trembling on oars, looked to one another in baffled gratitude, unable to believe what they had witnessed. Passengers, huddled on the ice, wept quietly, stroking the melted frost on their cheeks. Eleanor, camera lowered at last, could only whisper, "Thank you," into the wind that carried away both her words and the bear's retreating form. That night, aboard a rescue vessel steaming south through dark waters, the images replayed on every screen. In lifeboat cabins, survivors spoke of the bear as though it were an old friend, their white guardian, on the ice. The captain, voice hushed, announced at an impromptu gathering that the bear's intelligence and unexpected altruism had rewritten their understanding of polar wildlife. Behavioral scientists, tailing the story through video analysis and witness interviews, began drafting case studies even before the ship docked. Later, in lecture halls and wildlife symposiums, the footage would ignite debate. Was this a one-in-a-million act of interspecies assistance or evidence of a deeper, overlooked capacity for empathy in Ursus maritimus? Could such behavior become more common as polar bears adapt to shrinking ice habitats and increased human encounters? The cinematic quality of the images, dramatic angles, slow-motion nudges, the bear's silhouette crowned by Arctic twilight, only amplified the sense that viewers had witnessed something transcendent. Yet those who studied the bear's behavior emphasized caution against anthropomorphism. Dr. Alvarez reminded audiences that while the bear's steering of the lifeboat resembled human heroism, it likely arose from a blend of curiosity, investigative drive, and an association of the boat as a stable platform. In the bear's mind, guiding the boat to ice may have reduced risk to itself by ensuring the floating object did not drift away with potential food. But even within that framework, the act resonated as a profound reminder that intelligence and adaptability are not the exclusive province of humanity. As dawn broke over the ice-strewn sea, the rescued passengers, crew, and scientists boarded helicopters and supply vessels bound for research stations and home ports. Yet none forgot the bear's silhouette receding into the Arctic haze, a silent protector whose single act of guidance had saved lives. In the aftermath, a news network ran the footage on loop, the bear's nudges and stoic posture becoming a viral emblem. Social media exploded with hashtags. #ArcticHero, #BearGuardian, #WhiteSentinel. Conservation groups seized the moment to campaign for stronger polar protections, emphasizing that such heroic encounters were fragile gifts in a world of vanishing ice. For Eleanor, whose photographs would grace magazine covers and gallery prints. The event became the pinnacle of her career, the moment when wildlife crossed the boundary from subject to savior. In her published essay, she wrote of the bear's noble intelligence, urging readers to recognize that if a creature born to hunt and roam could risk itself to guide strangers to shore, perhaps humanity too could learn to chart a safer path for the Arctic's future. And so ends the first chapter of the polar bear hero's tale, a story set against the melting grandeur of the North, where steel and ice collided, and a bear, moved by instinct in ways we can barely fathom, became a guardian of human lives, continuous in its wonder, unnumbered in its grace. This account reminds us that in the vast theater of nature, true heroes may wear fur and roam on padded paws, guiding us back to hope beneath the endless sky. Continuous fascination lingered as we prepared for the next chapter, exploring in deeper detail the bear's behavior, the science behind its choices, and the cinematic moments that captured the world's awe. Continuous respect endured for the silent sentinel who rose, for one night, to lead us from peril to safety in the heart of the Arctic. Continuous resonance echoed in every heart touched by the tale of the polar bear hero. As dawn's rosy fingers unfurled across the silent ice, the rescue vessel's decks hummed with a different kind of urgency, a careful, methodical sorting of relief rather than panic. Survivors in thermal blankets clustered around steaming mugs of hot tea, their voices low and reverent as the day's light revealed the full scale of the Aurora's damage. A gash in the bow leaking seawater, a shattered promenade deck now jutting at a jarring angle, and lifeboats bobbing beside the listing hull like forlorn canoes stranded by an unseen undertow. Yet amid the wreckage stood the quiet imprint of one extraordinary actor, the polar bear whose gentle nudges had guided those fragile lifeboats to solid ice. Word of the bear's heroism rippled swiftly across the ship. Crew members whispered of that dusky hour when they, too, had seen the bear approach. Head held low, eyes locked on the boat's edge. Bartender Marta Olsen, who had helped distribute life vests on deck, recalled the precise moment she realized what was happening. I glanced up through the lifeboat's railing and saw this big white figure leaning in. For a heartbeat I thought I was dreaming, then the boat eased forward. And I knew we had help. Her voice trembled slightly as she recounted how, with each gentle shove, the boat edged closer to a safe perch. I've served Arctic cruises for 10 years, she said. Never have I witnessed anything so profoundly alive. Below deck, Captain Henrik Larsson convened a council of officers and senior crew under the harsh glare of emergency lights. The bear's actions dominated every report. Radar logs were cross-checked, sonar recordings unearthed, and security camera footage scrubbed for every second of the encounter. The consensus was unanimous. This bear's behavior fell outside the expected patterns of wild Ursus maritimus, whose interactions with ships typically ended in thunderous roars, hasty retreats, or, all too often, the fatal attraction to human refuse. Here, instead, was an animal extending help across species lines, seemingly guided by an instinct that echoed something eerily altruistic. In the ship's makeshift media center, documentary footage from passenger smartphones and official video systems was consolidated into the first rough cut of what would become known worldwide as the White Guardian. Crowds gathered around monitors, faces illuminated by flickering images of that silent sentinel on the ice. News anchors called it a miracle, wildlife experts called it a revelation. Even explorers and naturalists, long accustomed to viewing polar bears as apex predators, fearsome, solitary, now paused to reconsider their preconceptions. Biologist Dr. Lena Vall's live broadcast commentary, streamed in tandem with the footage, punctuated every scene with scientific insight. Watch how the bear tests the boat's side with a single paw. She explained, that exploratory tap is a known investigative behavior in young bears, but here it's recalibrated into an intentional act of guidance. Meanwhile, the rescued passengers were flown to a remote research station on the mainland, where researchers took the opportunity to gather first-hand accounts. Over bowls of hot soup in a heated mess hall, survivors described the bear's quiet determination and the palpable sense that it recognized their vulnerability. One retired engineer, Joseph Kim, likened it to a deep-sea pilot guiding a lost vessel to port. His words captured the collective astonishment at bearing witness to an animal bridging the chasm between the wild and the human world, guiding fragile craft toward safety. That evening, in a lecture theater warmed by kerosene lamps, Dr. Mateo Alvarez delivered an impromptu seminar on polar bear cognition, using freeze-frame stills from the lifeboat footage. He walked the audience through each calculated movement, the bear's initial approach, its careful survey of the boat's balance, the minutely timed nudges that compensated for wind and ocean swell. This behavior suggests a higher level of situational awareness, he concluded, and perhaps even empathy, recognition that an unfamiliar object, carrying beings in distress, needed help to reach a stable platform. Questions flew from the audience. Had the bear learned this from previous encounters with shifting ice floes? Was there precedent for such behavior in other bear populations? Alvarez answered thoughtfully, acknowledging the rarity of the event while urging caution against over-anthropomorphizing wildlife. As the night deepened and the aurora borealis shivered overhead, crew and scientists alike pondered the broader implications. Hydrographic technicians plotted the day's ice conditions on large wall maps, tracing the narrow channels through which the bear had navigated. They discussed how shrinking summer ice forced polar bears into more frequent coastal forays, sometimes closer to human activity than ever before. With food sources compromised by climate change, bears encounter ships more often, scavenging on deck waste or investigating stranded vessels. The hope, they agreed, was that incidents like this one might serve as catalysts for stricter wildlife management protocols, better refuse containment on ships, designated ice-farer corridors, and non-lethal deterrent training for crew interacting with curious bears. On the deck of the rescue vessel the next morning, the first light breeze carried a whisper of the bear's passage. Researchers lowered long-range cameras from the stern, scanning the ice edge for its silhouette. While the bear itself did not reappear, its presence lingered in every expanse of fractured floes, in every shifting slab of ice that mirrored the vessel's scars. Documentary filmmaker Olivia Chen captured the scene in silent shots, empty lifeboats tethered to the stern, their orange paint dulled by frost, the distant horizon where ice met water in a delicate, trembling line, and the faint tracks on the ice, paws and planks intermingled, a map of guidance etched into snow. That evening, back aboard the cruise ship, now patched enough to make the journey home, passengers gathered at sunset on the upper deck. They brought photos of the bear, printed on glossy paper, and read passages from diaries scribbled in the wake of the ship's sinking. A hush descended as Captain Larson stepped forward, voice resonant against the Arctic wind. He spoke not only of gratitude for the bear's unexpected assistance but of a solemn covenant. We have witnessed a creature bridging two worlds. Let us honor that by taking every step to preserve the ice it calls home. This bear showed us that compassion can transcend species. Now, let us show our compassion by safeguarding its realm. All around, the slowly setting sun painted the sky in molten gold, and the ship's whistle rang across the glassy sea. In that moment of shared wonder, the passengers understood that their lives had been irrevocably intertwined with the fate of a single polar bear. They had boarded the Aurora seeking the majesty of the Arctic, only to find its greatest marvel in an act of quiet heroism by a creature born of ice and wind. Continuous reflection, continuous awe, and a continuous pledge to protect the fragile frontier where human lives and polar bear lives are forever linked by that fateful night on the floe. As the rescue vessel steamed southward through widening channels of open water, the world aboard shifted from crisis response to contemplative action. In the warmth of the ship's makeshift conference room, scientists and crew gathered around a large screen where footage of the bear's guiding nudges played on endless loop. The moment when the bear's paw pressed gently against the lifeboat's stern, so unhurried, so deliberate, was slowed to half speed, revealing the subtle flex of its claws and the measured timing that steered the craft inch by inch toward safety. For each viewer, that single frame crystallized into a testament of unexpected empathy. Meanwhile, behavioral ecologist Dr. Mateo Alvarez and data analyst Ingrid Sorensen set up a series of side-by-side comparisons. On one screen, sonar readings taken moments before the collision showed the ship's forward hull slicing through submerged ice, an irresistible curiosity to a bear accustomed to following cracking floes. On the other, Audio spectrograms captured the bear's low rumbling exhalations, calls more typical of social greeting behaviors among cubs reunited with mothers than of solitary predators confronting strangers. Alvarez explained how this combination of investigative drive and interspecies social cueing likely converged in that extraordinary act. The bear recognized the lifeboat as a stable platform, akin to a floe, and instinctively nudged it to tilt away from deeper water, thus ensuring its own navigational safety while fortuitously aiding those aboard. From the ship's bridge, Captain Larson joined via video link, recounting the technical details with crisp precision. He described how, during the critical moments, the crew's attempts to manually row the lifeboat to ice had faltered against wind and current. Then, without warning, the bear's intervention reversed the drift. His voice grew quiet as he admitted that, even after decades in Arctic waters, he had never witnessed anything like it, and feared he might never again. He lauded the bear's behavior as a clarion call for stronger wildlife encounter protocols on polar cruises, noting that the next generation of captains would study this incident as a defining moment in human-bear relations. Through the ship's portholes, the jagged horizon melted into swirling ribbons of aurora. Below deck, filmmakers edited the incoming video, passenger recordings, bridge camera angles, infrared drone footage, intercut with reflective interviews. They layered in interviews with witnesses, the astrophysicist who had catalogued the ice collision's precise timing, the retired mountaineer who had seen the bear dredge its paw from the water, and the child whose eyes had widened in awe as the bear gently guided the lifeboat. Each testimony added emotional bricks to a narrative fortress, a story of survival, of intelligence transcending species. A tale that would soon reach millions. In the mess hall, passengers clustered around printouts of high-resolution stills, the stark contrast of ivory fur against steely gray water. A spray of droplets frozen midair as the bear shifted its weight. The blue plastic of the lifeboat's hull dented softly by an enormous paw. Over shared cups of coffee, survivors quietly vowed to champion polar conservation, recognizing that if an Arctic apex predator could extend aid to humans, humanity in turn must extend aid to the vanishing ice realm that bore both bear and boat. Late that night, in the ship's quiet corridors, crew members paused beneath dim exit signs to scratch notes in leather-bound field journals. They wrote of the bear's footsteps on ice, the tremor of their own voices, the precise angles at which the bear had applied force to guide the lifeboat. Technical diagrams sprouted in margins, vectors showing nudges needed to overcome drift, pressure maps illustrating safe landing zones, behavioral flowcharts mapping the bear's decision process. It was as if the bear's act of guidance had unlocked a new lexicon of interspecies protocol, one that might inform everything from lifeboat design to Arctic search and rescue training. At sunrise, the vessel docked at the nearest research station, cranes lowering the battered lifeboats for inspection and repair. Marine biologists, led by Dr. Nadia Hassan, crowded the dock, eager to measure sled boat samples, examine the textured paw prints still etched into fiberglass, and collect whisker fragments caught in the boat's rigging. Each sample promised clues to the bear's interaction, the thickness of fur, traces of sea salts and algae, chemical isotopes mapping the bear's last meals. In the laboratory's cold room, Hassan held one stiff whisker under a microscope, marveling at its tapered structure, the perfect hybrid of polar guard hair and bristling grizzly undercoat. A single filament carrying the weight of an entire narrative. Meanwhile, communications teams prepared a global press release. Scientists would caution against romanticizing the bear's behavior, stressing that wild animals must not become dependent on human rescue craft. Guidance would be issued to adjust maritime waste protocols, strengthen crew training in bear deterrence that spared rather than harmed, and foster nonviolent coexistence practices. Yet at the core of every bulletin would be the undeniable truth: an Arctic bear had guided strangers to safety, altering the narrative of human-bear interactions forever. As the day wore on, a hush of anticipation settled over the research station. At 4 p.m., on-site scientists convened a live online forum, drawing thousands of viewers eager to hear from experts. In one panel, behavioral specialist Dr. Lena Morozova dissected the bear's guiding actions, demonstrating how even a simple environmental cue, a bobbing lifeboat, could trigger a complex response when filtered through the cognitive lens of a near-apex predator. She illustrated how the bear's youth might have played a role. Younger bears, less burdened by territorial protocols and less cautious of humans, can display more exploratory, less aggressive behaviors, but she stressed that this event should not be seen as a template for routine encounters. Rather, it was a rare alignment of circumstance, individual temperament, and perhaps a spark of cross-species understanding. As the sun dipped behind the Arctic horizon, bathing the docks in rose and lavender, survivors and scientists gathered on an elevated platform for a final commemoration. A single spotlight illuminated a lifeboat propped atop ice blocks, its bow bearing a subtle indentation, the lasting artifact of a polar bear's paw. One by one, survivors approached to sign a commemorative plaque affixed to its side, names scrawled in permanent marker. Each stroke a pledge to share the story and to protect the realm that fostered such unexpected heroism. In the growing twilight, the spotlight dimmed, leaving only the hushed murmur of seagulls and distant ice creeks. Above, the first stars of the Arctic night shimmered through a canvas of deep indigo. And somewhere beyond the harbor lights, beyond the hulls of ships and the chatter of human voices, a lone polar bear roamed the vast floes, its act of guidance now inscribed in the collective memory of a grateful species. A testament to the fragile bonds that can form at the edge of two worlds. Continuous vigilance, continuous stewardship, and continuous respect would be the watchwords spawned by this extraordinary event. A polar bear hero story whose echo would resonate through Arctic seas and human hearts for generations to come. As the weeks turned into months, the story of the Arctic bear's extraordinary rescue rippled outward, carried on news broadcasts, social media threads, and hushed conversations in research stations across the globe. Documentarians edited the footage into a feature-length film, weaving together the raw immediacy of passenger videos with slow-motion replays of that fateful night, each frame painstakingly color-corrected to preserve the crisp blues of ice and the pale gold of emergency lights. Viewers around the world sat riveted as the bear's powerful shoulder heave propelled that lifeboat inch by trembling inch toward solid ice. A guardian both mythic and utterly real. In the film's final scenes, cinematographers juxtaposed the bear's retreat into the silent floes with shots of a starkly empty deck on the repaired Aurora. Ropes coiled and davits swung home, awaiting its next voyage. A soaring score of strings and piano underscored the sense of transcendence, painting human and animal struggles as parts of a single Arctic symphony. And over it all, the narrator's voice, gentle yet unwavering, reminded viewers that what they had witnessed was not simply a one-off miracle, but a testament to interwoven destinies in a world under stress. At major wildlife conferences, researchers presented follow-up studies. Satellite tag data showed that the rescue bear continued to range widely across its traditional hunting grounds, unaffected by trauma and perhaps emboldened by its brush with human craft. Behavioral surveys noted a slight uptick in curious, though non-aggressive, encounters between polar bears and anchored vessels, suggesting that this individual's boldness may have influenced its peers. Importantly, researchers stressed that every such encounter remains fraught with peril, a reminder that human proximity risks habituation, and that rescue interventions must never encourage dependency or diminish wild instincts. Governments and maritime regulators took note. Cruise lines operating in polar waters adopted stricter wildlife encounter protocols, mandating bear-safe waste management and non-lethal deterrence. Lifeboat designs were revisited, with suggestions for reflective panels or gentle automated guidance systems capable of self-righting and signaling bears away from hulls. Innovations inspired directly by the polar bear's own guiding nudges. At the International Polar Tourism Summit, the Aurora incident became a case study in best practices, illustrating how humans can learn to share the ice rather than dominate it. Back in the Arctic, indigenous communities reaffirmed their roles as stewards. Inuit elders incorporated the bear's story into teaching circles, using it to illustrate the values of attentiveness and respect for all beings. In a landmark agreement, native councils and conservation agencies co-authored a Charter for Arctic Wildlife Consent, laying out principles for humane coexistence, principles forged by that singular moment when a bear perhaps guided by curiosity or a fledgling spark of empathy, reached across species lines to save human lives. The bear itself, a silent wanderer of ice and wind, became a living legend. Vessels charted its last known collar ping location far north of the shipping lanes, on an ice field patterned like a cracked mirror. There, under the eternal twilight, the bear roamed free once more, its pawprints fading into silica-bright snow. Occasionally, kits of researchers in quiet approach noted a familiar silhouette on the horizon. White fur gleaming under the sun that never fully set, a ghostly reminder that heroism can arise in the wildest of places. In lecture halls and cabins alike, students and tourists recited the tale with wonder. How a star guide of steel and canvas became a fragile craft afloat on an unforgiving sea. How a bear transformed from predator into protector in one extraordinary act. How in the Arctic's extreme realm, boundaries between species blurred into a single narrative of survival. And at the heart of every retelling, one enduring truth, that compassion, whether born of instinct or shared necessity, can cross any gulf, ice or water or fear, uniting us in the unlikeliest of alliances. Today, the bear's guiding gesture is commemorated with a simple emblem, a single bear paw print alongside a lifeboat silhouette that adorns icebreaker hulls, research station doors, and the lapels of Arctic conservationists. It stands not as a trophy, but as a promise to honor that moment of interspecies cooperation by protecting the fragile stage on which it unfolded. Because if a creature driven by hunger, chill, and survival could pause to guide strangers to safety, then perhaps humanity, too, can learn to navigate the storm-tossed waters of stewardship with equal grace. And so, under skies pallid with ice fog or aglow with northern lights, the legend lives on. Each gust of Arctic wind carries its echo. Each hush of shifting floes whispers its moral, that in a world governed by primal forces, something extraordinary can spark when we dare to see one another not as adversaries, but as fellow travelers drifting together across the boundless expanse of life's frozen frontier. Continuous hope, continuous respect, continuous wonder. These are the legacies of the polar bear hero who led us, paw by paw, back to safety beneath the endless Arctic sky.